All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Speaking of Data. Megan and I are very happy to welcome Lauren Burke-McCarthy on the podcast today. She is data associate director for data science and AI strategy with Further. She's participated in a virtual summit with us recently, which we were very happy to have her there, and we're very excited to talk with her today about building trust and managing risk with governance. We've talked a bit about governance on this podcast, but I think this particular topic should be really interesting for both Megan and I to hear your thoughts on, Lauren. Before we jump into the questions and everything like that, let me just say thank you so much for your time today. And how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Andrew. I'm so excited to be here with you and Megan today.
Absolutely. We're super excited to have you. And again, building trust and managing risk with governance, I think, is a topic that our audience will be interested in as well here. And I feel like a great place for us to start is with the risk side of things. So, can you explain a little bit about what new risks AI introduces that organizations may not be fully prepared for? And then also, like, where are you seeing organizations most exposed right now when it comes to data and AI risk?
Absolutely. And I think this is a great question to start with because a lot of times what we recommend in AI strategy and governance is starting with that risk-based approach. So, a great place to start. And first and foremost, so AI is a little bit different from a lot of software technology that we've been familiar with for a long time. It is more probabilistic, which means that we are dealing with a lot less consistency with the outputs, with the scenarios, with whatever we are using AI to support us with. And there's also a lot more potential for us to interact in a more open ended way with open ended text, with greater access to different systems, different types of content. And it's also a lot easier for us as individuals to interact with AI, especially generative AI. It is much more accessible to us than any other form of AI, more traditional machine learning tools. You wouldn't put, your social security number into Google Maps. You might put that into ChatGPT by accident. So the other thing I've noticed with AI, especially generative AI, especially AI powered automation, is we're stretching the distance a little bit more between human judgment and decisions. And we're especially seeing that when we get into the agentic space. So if you're asking about like the key risks, some of those exposures, I think the biggest one is data and access. More systems, more data, that's what powers AI, and it does so at scale. And then thinking about that access, the access we're giving it sometimes unknowingly or without approval. So shadow AI usage.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That, I mean, what you're saying totally resonates with what we're seeing in the data. I think some of the points around the types of things that AI is both producing and interacting with, a lot of unstructured data. So that's, at the heart is harder to govern. And the whole shadow AI concept, we see that in a lot of our research. And just overall, from a maturity standpoint, because it's such a new space, so many organizations still, are categorizing, almost 50% in a recent survey for TDWI still categorize themselves as immature as it relates to AI governance, but it's one of their top priorities. So there's a long way to go for people, and I think everybody's still figuring it out. But as probably a good transition into our next question, like as you're working with clients and as you think about AI governance, who should own it, and how do you sort of create accountability around governance without slowing down the innovation? I know that's what's really important. Sometimes people get afraid of governance because they feel like it puts the kibosh on, all the exciting things that they're working on and developing. So how do you think about that?
Yeah. Great question. And I love that you mentioned with the stats you just mentioned, both the fact that AI governance maturity is not really there yet, but it's a high priority. And you also mentioned some stats about unstructured data. And when we're talking about accountability, it really is all encompassing because data feeds into those AI models. Bad data leads to bad decisions. And with AI, that's bad decisions at scale. So it really is this comprehensive, full scope responsibility where if you do it well, you're not necessarily slowing down innovation, you're just getting ahead of those challenges. So
Yeah.
maybe you put the brakes on a little, you don't stop completely and go back to, go in monopoly terms.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I read something recently just about because garbage in, garbage out has always been an issue, when it comes to like if you've been in the data and analytics space for a long time, that's an age-old problem in the organization. But, the amplifying impact that AI has on that garbage data is it can really stop things in their tracks. And I think what you said around addressing it early and having a practice and a plan around it, really it doesn't end up stalling it out. It makes sure that you can like move into production and scale it faster because I think what we see a lot is people are okay with a certain amount of risk in a pilot phase, but once you like move to scale it, that risk has bigger impacts, and so it really can hamper things. So planning up front helps you downstream.
Absolutely. And it helps you so much with that risk perspective as well, like you mentioned, because edge cases, situations in the real world are so much different from what we can plan for. Humans love to throw new
100%.
problems at
Yeah.
systems.
Yeah, I feel like the garbage in, garbage out has been like a bumper sticker, so to speak, for the industry for so long. And then with AI, it's turned into quite a billboard. Like you really need to pay attention to that. And I'm curious, we've heard a decent amount over the last 2 years around evolving regulations that are shaping governance strategies. And so, like, how can organizations stay ahead of what's coming?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of great resources that you can look to stay on top of what regulations are coming, which ones have timelines that we're starting to approach fairly quickly. I highly recommend. So I received an AIGP, AI Governance Professional certification from the IAPP, International Association of Privacy Professionals. They have a wonderful newsletter that keeps a great pulse on all things regulatory. But the real thing with regulations that I would say watch out for is that they are driving specific requirements and they're requiring that you have proof of that in place, whether it's documentation based, whether it's action based. And that's all going back to the very first thing we talked about, risk based. The more risk, the more requirements. And so if you're playing in that high risk space, you need to be aware,
Yeah.
abide by the strictest regulations because it's coming and those will be things that you need to be ahead of and have proof of at some state.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that because we've been talking about AI governance and data governance a lot on the podcast recently, but the regulatory side of things and how to track that has not been something that's really been that we've delved into, nor have we got any suggestions on that. So I um, appreciate that, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate that. So responsible AI, that is a widely used term these days, and I'm interested from your perspective, and as you have worked with your clients at Further and what you've seen in the market, how are people operationalizing that within an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting because we say responsible AI, and then you look at all of these different frameworks, and they'll all have between 5 to 10 principles attached. So we call it responsible AI, but it's really this balance of all of these other things: fairness, accountability, trust, safety, security. And so, responsible AI for any organization, it's just enhancing trust and maximizing your value while also minimizing the risk associated as best you can. And so, that really just looks like looking at your organization and knowing where you're using AI, how it's being used, is it being used safely, what data it's touching, what risk the use case, that data, that interaction creates. And then the responsible part is what roles do you have? What controls do you have? Who is accountable for making sure that it stays responsible? And all of those principles are held to the standard that you need.
How, when it comes to trust, how are your like, how do people increase trust in data and AI?
Yeah. And I have seen some really interesting statistics from TDWI recently, especially on the trust and confidence in structured versus unstructured data,
Yeah, I mean, because there's a big difference. I mean, people have a harder time trusting unstructured data.
which is absolutely fair because it is one, the greatest source of data we're creating now, but it's so much more challenging to manage. And the consistency that is held within that data and the way we set up a model and context to understand it is how that will be presented to users. So it's really layers of trust coming from the way we manage data to the confidence it instills in whoever's using it, the comfort they feel with knowing the decisions, the outputs, the outcomes that are influenced are consistent, accurate, fair. And so the trust really comes from knowing and being able to explain, validate, monitor whatever you're doing at any point in an AI system.
And I guess the more proactive, like the more governance is part of your daily interactions with the data, with the tools, like the more that they see governance as a high priority from a user perspective, the more that the trust is reinforced because they can see that it's a high priority organizationally, and then that reinforces the trust they have as they're working, whether it be in AI or analytics or whatever it may be.
Absolutely.
And kind of building off of that as we wrap up here, I'm many of our audience members are in organizations that have had probably long-standing data governance practices, but might be, turning a page a little bit into this AI governance realm. So for teams that are getting started in that way, can you share maybe some practical first steps or quick wins, specifically around like reducing risk?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go for a hat trick and say that go for the risk-based approach. I highly recommend this. So, and you can do this by building on what you already have in place. So, thinking about what you need to look for. Where is AI being used? What does it look like? Is it traditional AI, machine learning? Is it Gen AI? Understand the scope of what you're doing and where. Document that so you have it and can maintain it. And then look at the risks, look at your use cases, look at your data access, look at who's interacting. Is it shared externally? The level of decisions being made, and say, this is what we define as high risk. Then start there. Put your resources, your time, your investment into monitoring those, set up controls where you need to, put human oversight in place. And also, I would say take a look at what third party tools you're using, because that's another area where we see shadow AI risk. We also see vendor risk growing, but start with risk, then to priorities, then accountability and controls, and maximize your resources like that.
That's really great advice because it helps take a very big, potentially very scary topic and sort of boil it down to a place to where to get started. So thank you for that. Thank you for taking time to participate in this episode with us. It was really fun to talk with you. And certainly loved for all of you listeners out there, Lauren had a great segment in our virtual summit that you guys should all listen to. And when we post this episode, we'll provide a link to it. So you can check that out as well. I will, for all of our listeners out there that are concerned about AI governance, TDWI has a lot of great resources online. We have some assessments where you can look at your overall AI readiness. You can look at your data governance maturity, things that are really important to factor in sort of where you stand as you're thinking about AI governance. We also, because this is such an important topic, our Data and AI Summit that's coming up in September, it's in Anaheim, just a block away from Disneyland for all you Disney lovers. And the first day of that summit is focused on AI strategy and governance. So that's a great opportunity to come together and talk about this important topic and see what others are doing to solve the problem. So I encourage our listeners to check that out. And, Lauren, thank you so much again. Andrew and I loved the conversation and look forward to having you on as part of TDWI events in the future.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. This was great. I love talking about AI governance and how we can make it more safe, responsible, and just more valuable for everyone who's using it. So thank you again.
To subscribe to the Speaking of Data podcast, or to learn more about TDWI's research and training on all things data management and analytics, visit tdwi.org or click the link in the description below. Thanks for tuning in.